Let's look at our front cover. Our front cover has our title, A Kwanzaa Miracle. Our author is Sharon Gayle, and our illustrator is Frank Norfleet. What do you think this book is going to be about? Ashley Parker and her brother Daryl thought December was the best month of the whole year. It's a month of miracles, Ashley told Daryl one day while they were outside playing in the snow. Yep, agreed Daryl, scooping up a big mound of snow between his mittens. First comes Christmas, then Kwanzaa starts the very next day. Suddenly, a big shadow loomed over Daryl and Ashley. It was Mrs. Jackson, the meanest lady in the whole building. Haven't I told you kids not to leave your toys all over the sidewalk? She said sharply. Sorry, Miss Jackson, said Daryl and Ashley quietly. It seemed as though Mrs. Jackson was always scolding them. Ashley, Daryl, called their mother as she stuck her head out of the second-floor apartment window. Our Kwanzaa planning meeting is about to start. Hurry up inside. Mrs. Parker looked down at Mrs. Jackson. Hello, Rose, she called. Do you think you'll be able to join us this year? Humph, was Mrs. Jackson's only reply. Ashley and Daryl hurried inside, happy to escape mean old Mrs. Jackson. The children arrived at their apartment to find it filled with neighbors. Daryl and Ashley looked around the room. They recognized all the people who lived in their apartment building. Everyone was there, except Mrs. Jackson. Welcome to our annual Kwanzaa planning meeting, Mr. Parker called out, trying to get everyone's attention. Our first mission is to select a theme for this year's Kwanzaa celebration. I suggest we make Umoja, the first principle of Kwanzaa, the theme for our party. After all, Umoja means honoring our family, community, nation, and race, and that seems to be the right spirit for this celebration. Then Mrs. Parker stood up. Does anyone else have suggestions for ways we can honor Kwanzaa? Venetia Thompson, who lived on the third floor, raised her hand. Everyone in the building called her Benny. I think our Kwanzaa celebration should have an honorary ancestor, she said. Everyone loved Benny's idea. But who should we choose? Asked Ashley. For a few minutes there was silence. Then Mrs. Parker said, Let's all spend the next few days thinking about it. I'm sure we'll come up with the right person. A few days later, Daryl and Ashley were outside having the most wonderful snowball fight. Daryl saved his best snowball until the fight was almost over. He knew Ashley was good and tired, so he took aim and fired. But instead of hitting Ashley, the snowball hit Mrs. Jackson's window. Uh-oh. What do you think's going to happen? Oh, look at her face. She doesn't look happy. The window instantly flew open. I want to see you kids in here right now, called Mrs. Jackson. I've got something to say to the two of you. Daryl and Ashley were really scared this time. They slowly climbed up the front steps of their apartment building. In the front hallway, they shook off every snowflake and carefully wiped their boots on the doormat. When they were sure they couldn't put it off any longer, they quietly knocked on Mrs. Jackson's door. Daryl and Ashley expected the worst. They expected Mrs. Jackson to yell or frown or maybe even give them a scolding. Instead, she surprised the children by inviting them inside for some hot cocoa and oatmeal cookies. Maybe she's not so scary after all. You aren't mad at us? Said Daryl, as they settled on the couch. No, said Mrs. Jackson kindly. You see, my little girl once broke a window during a snowball fight, too. You had a little girl? Daryl and Ashley exclaimed in unison. Yes, but she died when she was just a child. Would you like to see her picture? Yes, said Ashley and Daryl together again. As Mrs. Jackson showed Daryl and Ashley her family photo albums, she told them how much she missed her daughter and husband, who had recently passed away. You mean you don't have any family left? Asked Daryl. Mrs. Jackson didn't say anything for a moment. Just my sister, she said quietly, but she lives all the way in Johnstown. so we don't get to see each other often. Ashley and Daryl looked through the albums a little while longer. Then they thanked Mrs. Jackson for the cocoa and cookies. On the way up to their own apartment, they were very quiet. At dinner, they told their parents all about the snowball fight and their visit with Mrs. Jackson. "You know, Mrs. Jackson's not so bad," said Ashley. "And," said Daryl, interrupting Ashley, "her oatmeal cookies taste just like Grandma's." At bedtime, Mr. and Mrs. Parker came in to kiss Ashley and Daryl goodnight. "Daddy, Ashley and I were thinking," said Daryl. Mr. Parker chuckled. "Oh, and what were you thinking about?" Ashley gave out a little squeal. "We think Mrs. Jackson should be our honorary ancestor for Kwanzaa." "What a wonderful idea," exclaimed Mrs. Parker. "I'll call our neighbors tonight, then you two can ask her tomorrow morning, right after breakfast." Mr. and Mrs. Parker kissed Ashley and Daryl one more time, turned out the lights, and went into the living room. "You know, Mrs. Jackson once gave me her sister's phone number in case of an emergency," said Mr. Parker. Mrs. Parker smiled. "I remember, and I was thinking the same thing." What do you think they were thinking? They're talking about Mrs. Jackson's sister and her phone number. What do you think is going to happen? The next day, Daryl and Ashley paid a special visit to Mrs. Jackson. They invited her to the Kwanzaa celebration and asked if she would be the honorary ancestor. "How could I turn down such a special request from my two new friends?" Mrs. Jackson asked, clapping her hands with delight. "I'd be honored to attend." Daryl and Ashley hugged their neighbor before they ran home to tell their parents the good news. During the following weeks, the whole building prepared for Kwanzaa. Ashley and Daryl were especially busy helping their parents to get ready for the festivities. What are they doing? They've got the flag, they're wrapping gifts, Dad's cooking up some food. Finally, the first day of Kwanzaa arrived. When it was time for the festivities to begin, Daryl escorted Mrs. Jackson to the party. "Shh," whispered Ashley. "Here comes Mrs. Jackson." When Daryl and Mrs. Jackson walked through the door, the old woman opened her mouth in surprise. "Sister," she cried. Mrs. Jackson and her sister ran into each other's arms and hugged each other tight. "Let's celebrate," said Mr. Parker. So what did Mr. and Mrs. Parker do with Mrs. Jackson's sister? They invited her to the Kwanzaa celebration too. The Kwanzaa festivities were a big success. Everyone enjoyed the food, music, dancing, and company of friends and family. Then it was time to honor Mrs. Jackson. When Mr. Parker gave the signal, Ashley ran up to Mrs. Jackson with a bouquet of flowers. "Mrs. Delphia Jackson," Ashley called out loud and clear, "we name you our honorary ancestral grandmother." Mrs. Jackson graciously took the flowers from Ashley. Then she stood up and faced the group. "Thank you all, especially Ashley and Daryl, for this wonderful honor. And thank you to my sister for coming to share this special time with me. You have all given me a Kwanzaa miracle." Then she smiled the biggest, brightest smile they had ever seen. "Happy Kwanzaa," Daryl and Ashley shouted.